And this was a real bombshell that happened over the last month. And it teaches us enormous lessons, again, about capitalism. It's the story of Volkswagen, the number one German car company, and indeed, by total sales, I believe, the number one car company in the world. VW, as you all know. VW got caught. Pants down, caught. No argument. They've admitted it. So it's not anymore allegedly. They have admitted to what? Let's be real sure we all understand. Many governments, including the United States, have laws, regulations. And one of them covers the amount of crap that your car can emit through the exhaust pipe into the air. See, it turns out that the stuff that comes out of the back of a car engine is terribly dangerous. It causes asthma, it causes emphysema, it causes lung cancers. It's just awful. The number one source of air pollution in the world is the private automobile, of which VW is the largest single producer. Therefore, governments have passed regulations. Why? Because people upset by the pollution caused by automobiles weren't critical of capitalism, weren't critical of private enterprise. They didn't think that was necessary. All that you need to do is have a good regulation. Volkswagen, like all the other car companies, fought against having those regulations. For years, they kept that from happening. Good for them. Those were years in which they could pollute because it wasn't any regulation. Then, finally, there was such an outcry that there was finally an agreement by the Congress of the United States and by agencies comparable in other countries to do something. At that point, VW, like the other car companies, changed its tactics. This is typically what happens in every one of these cases. Now, once it was clear regulations were going to happen, it became important to, do the minimum regulation that you could possibly get. Do the minimum regulation, but have it take effect years later. That doesn't work? Okay. Have the minimum regulation phased in over years. That doesn't work? Okay. Let's have the industry self-regulate and have the law provide for a regulation by the industry of the industry. And that takes arguments and fighting and yes. During all this time, they can continue to pollute because there's no regulation yet in place. Finally, if everybody perseveres, a regulation is passed. How is that done? An agency is set up that is going to measure the pollution to determine that they've taken the steps to reduce it to a certain amount. What do the car companies then do? Make sure they get their friends on that agency. Make sure that agency doesn't have enough money allocated to it by the Congress to do anything. And then make sure that every time they do anything, they are attacked in the press for being intrusive upon the rights and freedoms of free enterprise. That'll make it very hard for them to do anything. But let's suppose none of that works, or at least after years, there finally are real regulations. That was the story of how we got the regulations that are in place, have been in place for some years, to limit the amount of pollution that comes out of a car. Technical reality, just so you all know. If you put the devices that limit the pollution, it means that the car can't be quite as zippy as it would have been without that stuff. It can't accelerate at the same speed. It can't do certain things. Now there it must have struck VW. Now there's an opportunity. After the regulation is in place, when other car companies meeting the regulation because they think they have to, simply put on the market a therefore somewhat less zippy car, Volkswagen said, hey, if we can design a device that when you test it in the lab, when the government tests it, it shows not much pollution, but when you go out on the road in it, that device stops working, then you can get a zippy car, which actually pollutes like crazy, but no problem because when it's tested by the agency, it doesn't show a lot of pollution. That's what Volkswagen did with 11 million cars over a decade. It got caught. It got caught. But before I tell you what that means, let's go back and make sure we all get what VW did. And before I go any further, I don't mean to pick on VW. In the 1990s, the Ford Motor Company, you've heard of them, they got caught doing the same thing. So this is not a specialty of VW. It's just, and by the way, Ford got caught, and Ford got prosecuted, and Ford had to pay a big fine. That had a real deterrent effect, as you can see. The fines are too small to make a difference. At the end of this long delay of the regulation, and you finally have it, and you finally violate it, and you finally get caught, the fine is not significant. So I don't want to pick on VW, but they're the ones that got caught, so we're going to tell the story. 11 million cars. First of all, interesting, most of them, the largest single chunk, are in Germany. So we have a German company polluting the German countryside and killing and maiming its own citizens. If I had time, I'd stop, I'd get out my record player, and the German national anthem would be a little musical interlude. The second place in the world, I believe it's number 2, is the United Kingdom, the UK. People in the UK love diesel cars, and they have about half the cars on the road in England are diesel. So they had a huge market in Britain. They also had a huge market in Japan, and there's about 500,000 on the road here in the United States, between 400,000 and 500,000. That means for years, the Volkswagen company single-handedly contributed to major gross air pollution that your kid's emphysema has something to do with, and asthma has something to do with. They knew what they were doing. You know why? Because they knew the story of what had happened to Ford. Ford got caught with the same device back in the Econoline van. Some of you remember that Ford car? That was the one that got caught doing this. And there are other companies, Mitsubishi, Mazda, I don't remember them all, that are now being investigated as people everywhere in the world are measuring the difference between the pollution numbers you get when you're tested in the lab and the pollution numbers you get when you're out on the road using the car for what it was designed for. We're not talking now about excess profits. We're talking about killing people, knowingly choosing to do what corporations have as their quote-unquote bottom line, maximizing profits. VW came up with a great strategy. It could say, our cars are zippy. Our cars have lots of acceleration. Get yourself a Jetta or get yourself a Passat or the other cars that they make with a diesel, and you will get a car that meets all the requirements and that's zippy. And why is that? Because, as everybody knows, German engineering is formidable. It's all a crock. It's got nothing to do with engineering, at which the Germans aren't significantly better than lots of other people. It wasn't engineering. It was fraud, straight out fakery. A fakery that cost the health and lives of who knows how many people.
They did engineer the device, though.
They did. They made that device. They made that. Maybe they invented it. Maybe they took it from Ford. Who knows? It is an example at the highest level of what capitalism's normal function is. If it makes more money, basically, do it. Are there some honest people who resist? Of course, there always are, thankfully. But they always have the uphill game to play. Yes. And I could give you other examples. I could give you loads of other examples. But this one is so gross and so much in the air that I really wanted to talk about it. Final thing about Volkswagen, it's part of the automobile industry, don't you know? And the automobile industry has really had a stunning couple of years. First, I'm not sure if you're aware, the overwhelming majority of American cars on the road have had to be recalled in the last 3 years. Their ignitions are no good. Their airbags, remember? General Motors lied about the ignition problem that they knew about for apparently 10, 12 years. An ignition problem that made cars stall and stop in dangerous circumstances. Toyota and the Japanese subcontractor who made the airbags that blew up and pieces of metal could go into you and did. General Motors, I believe at the latest count, is talked about 125 people died in the problem that their cars had. So whether you go American or foreign or big car company or little car company, we have had a performance of illegal, unethical, dangerous, deadly behavior in a rational society. It would long ago have meant basic questions would have been asked. One, why do we have private companies? Why do we have that? Private companies are not safe. They're not reliable. They're crooks and they're dishonest. What are we doing? Well, the worst you could say is that if you made them public companies, they would still display crooks and dishonest. It's possible. But I really kind of wonder if they were publicly accountable, maybe you could get sooner some kind of slowing down of this awfulness compared to what you... Why isn't that a conversation? But here's an even better question that ought to be asked. Why the hell do we have a transportation system based on the private automobile? It's the number one killer of people. More people die in car accidents than in any other public mode in this country. Much more deadly than war. Every year, thousands and thousands die. Many more thousands are horribly injured. It's the largest cause of air pollution in the country. It uses up an enormous amount of fossil fuel to get around, which is not good 12 ways to Sunday. If you substituted public transportation, really good quality vans, buses, trains, and so on, you could move people just as well, and you would save lives and energy and pollution. I'm sure there are ways of doing a little bit of both. I've heard wonderful stories about public transportation accompanied by big lots at the outskirts of American cities. If you need a private car for anything, you go to one of those lots. It's a service maintained by your community, just like the public parks are. And when you need to take some time off and your family would like to have a picnic, you go to the park and you spread your blanket and you have your fried chicken. Now you would go to one of these parking lots on the edge of the city when you need an individual car because you're visiting friends far away or you want a trip into the country, whatever it is. And you'd make use of it. The car would be in good shape because it's maintained by the mechanics that work in that garage. You know the car is safe, the car is insured, everything's taken care of. You know what it's like? It's like Avis, only it's run by the government. So you have your private car on the few occasions when you need it. The use of fuel will drop like a stone. The pollution will drop like a stone. The deaths and injuries will stop. There's only one reason, whatever else you may think, why we don't even have a conversation about this. Because the automobile companies don't want it. They're making a lot of money. That's why they did what they did with the phony pollution measurements. That's why you have a car. That's why in most American cities, on any average corner, you have one gas station on one side and another one on the other, so that the beauty of those installations can assault you from all sides. There's almost as many gas stations as there are Chase Bank offices. And they're equally beautiful, as you probably noticed. It's a statement about capitalism, this disaster of VW. Finally, who made the decisions? Well, the head of VW has now resigned. And many other executives there may have a problem. Who knows? Don't cry too much for the executive who resigned. He has tens of millions of dollars in retirement and severance and other kinds of pay. You should be so unfortunate. But you know something? Tens of thousands of German workers are in trouble. You can't give away VW diesels anymore. Very hard. Nobody trusts them. Nobody's going to buy them. Anybody who bought a VW diesel is going to discover that whatever they thought they could get in the used car market for it, they don't get anymore. They have been all whacked and lost thousands of dollars, even though they don't know it yet. They haven't tried to sell it. They haven't tried to cash it in. They haven't tried to borrow against it. They haven't yet figured it out. But a decision to deceive that cost the health of millions is now going to cost the jobs and incomes of tens of thousands of workers who had absolutely nothing to do with this decision, who didn't want it, who didn't support it, who didn't know about it, and who are now going to be victimized by it. How is it possible for those of you that take seriously the notion of democracy to justify an economic system that can do this amount of damage to this array of people, allowing a tiny number of highly paid persons to perform this outrage on a regular basis? Robert Reich and Hillary Clinton are saving this system because, Lord help us, if it wasn't worth saving, why then their book and their candidacy would go down the drain. And that, of course, is not what anybody would even think about.